Yes, according to the Australian government's Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water, quote, more than 1,700 species and ecological communities are known to be threatened and at risk of extinction. End of quote. They include, of course, everything from the southern gastric brooding frog to the delightful Banksia montana mealybug.
Right.
But in the name of protecting these and many other no doubt worthy species, the Albanese government, and in particular Tanya Plibersek and Chris Bowen, are trying to sneak through Parliament one of the most dangerous pieces of legislation this nation has ever seen. Shrouded in secrecy, deception and obfuscation, this insidious new set of laws which will decimate mining, agriculture, tourism and much-needed development is being drafted under the touchy-feely, innocuous-sounding name of the Nature Positive Plan.
Ooh.
Ta-da!
The Nature Positive Plan sets out the Australian government's commitments to strengthen our environmental laws and start to create the framework for a nature positive Australia where we protect and repair nature. This is the largest change to Australia's national environmental laws since the introduction of the EPBC Act in the year 2000. The reforms will ensure our national environmental laws are outcomes focused and nature positive.
Oh.
Our nature positive laws will ensure we have a nature positive Australia because we are introducing nature positive laws. Ah, the classic Canberra circular argument, which tells you nothing. So let's dive deep into the Burley Griffin's swamp and try and find out what's really going on here. Have a listen to one of the bureaucrats behind this madness, James Tregurtha, the division head of the Nature Positive Taskforce, spelling it out in classic Canberra jargon.
It's also important to note that the new laws will introduce this concept of unacceptable impacts. So, for example, if there was to be identified an area of habitat that was determined to be critical to the ongoing survival of the koala as a species in the wild, then that could be determined, may well be recorded in the recovery strategies that Ilse's talking about, but certainly would be able to be taken into account in decision-making where where Environment Protection Australia would then be able to say that area is of such significance that no impacts would be permitted to that particular area of habitat, whether that's for the koala or any of the many other threatened species that are currently listed at the Commonwealth level.
So, quick translation. Basically, we climate-obsessed bureaucrats will soon have all the power to stop any development whatsoever simply by declaring that the development will have an unacceptable impact upon one of many thousands of threatened species. Carry on, James.
The requirement to be nature positive through the regulatory system will mean that where there are impacts on habitat, through necessary development, whether that's housing, critical minerals, Australia's transition to renewable energy infrastructure, it will be a requirement of those impacts where they are permitted to deliver a nature positive outcome through things like offsetting actions or contributions through a payment system in order to ensure that overall there will be a net gain for those threatened species, as Ilse was describing.
Translation: if you really want your project to go ahead, you evil miners or developers, it's going to cost you a fortune, big time. Now, let's have a piercing question from one of the other Canberra bureaucrats.
This is a good one. How will these laws be enforced and monitored? Will there be a standard?
The Nature Positive Plan does mention the potential for a compliance and enforcement standard, but the compliance and enforcement standard, the way the Nature Positive Plan conceived of that was to wait until the Environment Protection Australia entity was stood up as an entity in its own right, because the advice to the Minister in making a compliance and enforcement standard, we wanted that to be strongly informed by the new independent regulator.
Whoa, 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 steady on, hold your horses. This rings a bell. We'll legislate it first, then fill in the detail and the scope of its powers afterwards. Just like The Voice. Same old sneaky Albo, keep the punters in the dark. Here's another Canberra bureaucrat. My goodness, they do seem to mushroom. Filling in even more detail by not giving us any details.
We don't anticipate that the current definitions of critical habitats will be exactly the same under the new legislation. So there's not a direct translation. And as I say, that's largely because we've actually got a few different ways that we're approaching critical habitat at the moment.
OK, that's clear as mud then. Translation, basically critical habitat is whatever we say it is at the time we decide to tell you what it is. And finally, well, let's not beat about the bush here. What's this really all about?
Next question. Will the new laws allow approval of fossil fuel projects?
So, as now, the new laws won't distinguish between the nature of a project that is being presented to Environment Protection Australia, or in the current case under the EPBC Act, for approval. So applications will be able to be made across a range of sectors that would include fossil fuel projects. The Minister for the Environment will be obliged, where those projects are captured by the safeguard mechanism, to ensure that that information is then provided on to the Climate Change Minister, to ensure that minister, and through the safeguard mechanism, has full information in relation to the emissions profile of those particular projects. But other than that, they will progress through the regulatory system like any other project.
All about the impact, of course.
So there you have it. Translation, all roads lead back to Bowen, Chris Bowen. Mandatory reporting of emissions, giving the Climate Change Minister, that's Bowen, the ultimate say on any development project in this country where the bureaucrats have determined there is an unacceptable impact on a critical habitat. But the definition of those will be filled in later. So arguably we could be looking at Chris Bowen having the final say over all new tourism developments, all new roads, new hospitals, new small businesses, new dams, new hotels, and all mining and agricultural developments, and a great big mandatory payment, poof, slapped down on top. Let me repeat, as I wrote in my editorial in The Spectator Australia this week. What is inevitable if the Nature Positive plan goes ahead is that billions of tonnes of iron ore and other natural resource deposits will stay in the ground, resulting in hundreds of billions of dollars in federal taxes not being raised and tens of thousands of jobs never being created. Our downward economic spiral will accelerate. We learnt this week that it was only iron ore and coal that saved the Australian economy from going backwards in the last quarter of last year. Mining, it's our golden goose. But instead of making life easier for investors and businesses, Tanya Plibersek's and Chris Bowen's Nature Positive plan will make things 1,000 times worse. Indeed, rather than asking which projects do need to go through all this green tape, even the bureaucrats admit it's easier and a lot less time-consuming to ask which developments won't need to go through all this rubbish.
What are some examples of cases where environmental approval is not required?
In the new law, there will be an additional consideration which will be to ensure that there are no unacceptable impacts which go to the critical protection area and recovery strategy. So ensuring there are no impacts on a critical protection area and then no significant impacts on a nationally protected matter otherwise, those projects won't require national environmental approval by Environment Protection Australia.
Clear as the mud that the threatened mealybug is grovelling around in. And what might these nationally protected matters be? Why? What a surprise. Along with what you might expect, threatened species, wetlands, marine parks, and so on, spot the two clinchers right at the end. They've even got their own little special bit. Here's Mr. Tregurtha saying the quiet bit out loud.
protection of the environment from nuclear actions, and water resources in relation to impacts from coal seam gas development and large coal mining development.
There you have it. Forget the web-footed, purple-spotted nunchuck or whatever it is. It appears to me that this is all about giving a far more noxious species, the flat-footed, low-browed, climate-obsessed Labor politician, even greater powers to destroy the prosperity and productivity of this nation, your nation, in the name of their insane net zero ideology. Again, as I wrote in The Spectator Australia this week, quote, "The original Environmental Protection Act took years to create and ran to thousands of pages. This far more restrictive new set of laws is being rushed through in a matter of months to meet the ideological obsessions and fantasies of Canberra and the Albanese government's inner-city Green Left supporters. This is not a government acting in the public interest, but one shrouded in deception and secrecy. Nature Positive is Australia negative. We are taking a butcher's knife to slit the throat of our golden goose."